Season 2 of the Walking Dead game was sort of lackluster. I was initially intending to make another one of my Walking Dead parody videos, but as I was forced to watch each scene over and over and over again, I became increasingly frustrated at how disappointing Season 2 ended up being. While I thought that Season 1 was a flawed but otherwise entertaining game, Season 2 carries over the same telltale flaws of its predecessor, while taking a substantial decrease in quality in the areas the series previously excelled in. I finished Season 2 feeling that was a decidedly mediocre addition to the Walking Dead franchise. Don't get me wrong, it's not quite AMC levels of awful, but Telltale, baby, you're getting there. The following shall be me underlying my main issues with the second series of The Walking Dead. I won't be going too deeply episode by episode or anything. Instead, I'll use examples to support my main criticisms of the series overall, especially since I've already written over 4,000 words and I really can't be bothered doing more work. I didn't initially intend to make this a two-parter, but given the ridiculous length of these videos I feel it's justified. Don't expect a thorough analysis or anything, it's mostly going to be me outlining why I didn't like the series, then incoherently bitching about it. This was one of my biggest gripes with Season 1 and remains an issue that plagues Season 2, but to a much greater extent. I was incredibly disappointed that the sequel to a critically acclaimed and commercially successful series failed to rectify any of the pre-existing gameplay issues, and in fact it got a lot worse. The tedious mash Q to win combat sections are just as boring as ever. It's hard to engage in a desperate life or death struggle when all I have to do as a player is repeatedly press a single key until prompted to press another key. They appear so often that it kills any sort of sense of suspense or pacing since you are always under attack and the solution remains the same. These segments are supposed to be bursts of excitement and tension, when all they are in actuality are just boring slogs. Even within the incredibly limited, almost visual novel formats that these modern Telltale games take, there is no reasons for these sections to be so bland. Season 1 had several more interesting action sequences, such as the first Walker encounter in Episode 1 and the clunky but still otherwise fun cover-based shooting section in Episode 3. Season 2 Episode 1 even had some interesting dangerous encounters, such as with Dogmeat and the Shed Zombie, but aside from these, Season 2 has no aspirations to make anything outside of the dialogue interesting, cause it's die motherfucker still. There are no puzzles throughout the entire course of the series, and no challenge in any of the tasks that you have to do. This simplicity and tediousness of these tasks makes me wonder why they even exist in the first place. It's like Season 2 almost entirely forgets that it's a game and not a movie and tacks on trivial tasks to extend its length rather than have these segments actually add to the experience in any meaningful way. In Season 1 Episode 2, having to physically restrain Lily while Kenny turned Larry's head into mush was much more gut-wrenching because of the player's participation in the act and struggle to restrain Lily. It was really disturbing and actually made use of the fact that it was a video game. Season 2 has you wrestle a zombie by pressing Q a lot, then E. Even if we're to accept the premise that Season 2 decided to opt for a more cinematic experience or whatever, and just ignore this lack of decent player interactive play and pretend it's a movie, can the series at least try to imitate movies well? The series rarely takes advantage of the basic aspects of filmmaking that would improve the dialogue scenes substantially. There's very little attention paid to the direction of these scenes, and the editing overall is really sloppy. If Telltale are going to take so much control out of the player's hands, at least try to make the cinematography more interesting than serviceable and stationary profile shot of currently speaking character, which is what 90% of the game is comprised of. Dialogue isn't the only way to tell a story, and Season 2 would have been greatly improved if it paid more attention to its visual elements. Episode 4 appeared to take a stab at symbolism, but it was incredibly ham-fisted and obnoxiously done. I wonder what this scene is trying to tell me. What is the meaning behind this scene? What does this statue symbolize? I'm fucking stumped! To the game's credit, episodes 1 and 5 did actually have a few memorable and unique shots. Shots? Does that even work in this context? But overall the cinematography was really poor. Hey, I'm not exactly expecting 2001 A Space Odyssey or anything here, but at least try to make these dialogue scenes more visually interesting since there is so much fucking talking in this game and you insist on giving me zero input. I've only played the first episode of The Wolf Among Us, but even that game has a much more interesting visual presentation. The Walking Dead is just serviceable start to finish, and really dull. Something else that I haven't seen criticised about the game is the terrible audio design and mixing of the game.
Никакие оружия! Fuck!
Understand that Telltale isn't exactly a AAA studio, but the use of stock sound effects and the questionable voice work can lead to some inappropriately hilarious moments. The way the dialogue is obviously stitched together to force conversation down a set path isn't necessarily a problem, but when it's as poorly done as it is here...
I'm sorry about before.
Yes. I need, things for bandages. I need bandages.
Then it definitely is. I feel like these are two relatively small tweaks that wouldn't take that much effort, but would substantially improve Season 2 and make it less boring and immersion breaking. As soon as you launch the game, the familiar, somber soundtrack from the finale of Season 1 starts to play. This immediately left me concerned that Season 2 would try to lean too heavily on its predecessor, and it ends up doing exactly that to a ridiculous degree. The game will constantly and inappropriately bludgeon you over the heads with references and callbacks to our unfortunate protagonist of the first season, persistently inserting forced little pieces of emotional dialogue to the conversation that end up falling flat. I try to give it some leeway, but the frequency of these callbacks leaves me feeling like a bit of subtle would have been appreciated. Yes, I get it. Keep that hair short, Clem. Very clever, Telltale. Keep bringing that up. It's just as heartrending the 10th time someone notices that Clementine does indeed have a short haircut. If only Lee was still alive. What are you, Kaiser Reinhard? I get it, he's dead. It was all very sad. But get over it, or at the very least shut the fuck up about it. Even Game of Thrones, a series dedicated to brutally killing off characters, then parading their corpses around for shock appeal, doesn't constantly remind you about the characters that died in previous episodes or seasons. I labour this point because of the emotionally manipulative nature of Season 2. Rather than trying to engage in the struggles of the surviving characters and building on them, this series is much more content to just contrive drama while preying on the player's nostalgia and remaining goodwill, to keep reminding you of the sad bits from Season 1 while hoping that you forget that you have no reason to be invested in Season 2 at all. Kenny's return is something that worried me for this reason as well, and ended up being really a wasted potential, just like the rest of the characters. This isn't really a point that needs elaboration, but I'm gonna do so anyway. I mean, Christ, what a boring cast of characters. For a character-driven series best known for its writing, this is a colossal failure. With maybe 2 exceptions, every new character was either just dull or killed off as fast as they're introduced. They're given no time to develop or grow, and there are no occasions where the player is just allowed to talk to them about themselves, or how they feel about certain situations. There were very few instances where any of them displayed any particular personality, since most of the conversation is dominated by the dramatic incident that just occurred, or is about to occur. The optional array of questions given to players in the camera sections of Season 1 are totally absent in Season 2. This makes it even harder to establish characters in any decent or meaningful way, because the characters are given very little screen time individually. Kenny is the only character in Season 2 that develops in any way and has a clearly defined personality, and even then he is a carryover from Season 1. And the way he's developed is so contrived and bullshit that it makes no sense under any real scrutiny. In spite of that, however, he remained the only entertaining character that kept Season 2 from being totally boring, much like Shane did during Season 2 of the TV series of The Walking Dead. God, why did I watch that fucking garbage for 3 seasons? But aside from that, we have a bland cast of characterless survivors. I have no idea what they were trying to do with PewDiePie, Black Guy, presumably Mexican Doctor Guy, whoever the fuck this is, or either these arseholes. They were all just kinda lukewarm and nice, or just totally unlikable like Bonnie or Jane. I mean really, try to remember one thing Sarita said or did, and then whenever a character is unceremoniously killed off, the reaction of the cast is the same as my own, total indifference. I could go on about why I didn't like each individual character, but I decided it really isn't necessary. I mean, whenever I even think about Jane as a character, you know, my teeth, they just start grinding and my vision, it just starts to blur, and I just wish I could make the pain stop. I'll probably get back to this fucking mess of a character later. Season 2 really lacked decent pacing, Each episode was a brief 1 hour 20 minutes long, but intense barrage of stuff happening, and because of this there is very little downtime or character moments. The blustering pace that the story moves at leaves very little time for emotional investment, particularly when the characters die as thick and fast as they do in Season 2. If these deaths and various other dramatic conflicts had a greater overarching significance, then I could forgive it, but it's just stupid drama for its own sake. I mentioned earlier about the lack of time the players get to interact with the characters, and this really exacerbates the poor characters as well. The rapid pace gives you no time to get to know any of the characters or care about when they are inevitably killed off. This is a serious problem in a game that's 90% building up characters so they can die and then you cry about it. For example, in episode 3 of The Walking Dead, after Duck was bit, there was about a 30-minute segment of just characters reacting to his inevitable demise and just trying to let that sink in. Kenny's denial, Katja's sink into depression, and Clementine's limited understanding of mortality, so that when Duck finally does die, it's a really heartbreaking moment because you know how much this is affecting all the characters that you like. Carlos beats the shit out of his daughter and we're given no opportunity to talk to the group about the incident. Sarah dies and nobody gives a shit because apparently the baby's really cute or something. No matter how this guy dies, nobody says a damn word. If nobody in the game world cares when characters are bumped off, why should I? Overall, I feel like a longer but slower paced game would have left more time for emotional development. There should have been build up and payoff. Clementine is really poorly suited as a protagonist, as both a poorly thought out character and as a very poor means of involving the player in the game world. I was initially skeptical when I heard she would become the lead because I thought it would be a real hardship for Telltale to balance having a scrawny little girl as a protagonist, with the fact that she needs to be at the centre of all the world events, character conflicts and action sequences, because this is a video game, and this has to happen for some reason. The answer Telltale gives is just to ignore this entirely, and place Clementine in every notable and dangerous situation, no matter how illogical it is. While Lee was a strong sexy slice of black beef, and thus it made sense for him to get down and dirty with everything, it's comical to see that Clementine gets the same treatment, if not to an even larger extent. Hey Clem, let's explore this rickety bridge together. Hey Clem, let's search for survivors by ourselves. Hey Clem, infiltrate Carver's compound by yourself with nothing to defend yourself. Hey Clem, climb into this ominous looking hole. Hey Bonnie, how about you fuck off? There isn't any given reason as to why Clementine does everything in this group. Not even an arbitrary, completely bullshit reason, but nonetheless she does so anyway. She has a higher zombie kill count than any of the other characters in this series and is generally seen to have more combat ability and mental fortitude than any other character that exists in anything ever. Out of all the characters in the series, it's Clementine who manages to remain totally unaffected by her post-apocalyptic surroundings. And it's so completely far-fetched that I just can't buy into it.
Clem, how'd it go?
I struggle to believe that Telltale wants us to think this group has survived for over 2 years in this world, despite being less competent than an 11-year-old. Right? Telltale? Telltale? This is ridiculously absurd. I felt like episode 1 of season 2 firmly established the weakness of Clementine, how dangerous the world is, and her dependence on others for long-term survival. But this has been totally reversed by episode 4, with everyone completely dependent on her. This doesn't seem like character growth so much as just backtracking on the fact that she is an 11-year-old girl. And I say this repeatedly to stress the point. An 11-year-old girl would be highly unlikely to survive any length of time in such dangerous conditions. No, Clementine would be highly unlikely to be alright after suffering from severe hypothermia, a gunshot wound, and a car crash in the middle of a blizzard. If Telltale had stuck to their guns and had Clementine remain a weak, but smart, resourceful 11-year-old girl in a brutal post-apocalyptic surrounding, then she could have made a really interesting protagonist, but the way it panned out just ended up being a bit of a farce.